Farming First is a very important initiative because it brings together the scientists like myself, the farming associations, the agricultural producers, and industry, because we know that we all need to work together. But the focus must, of course, be the farmer. When we go into Copenhagen, there will be a special day on Agriculture and Rural Development Day to ensure that all these partners will be engaged and will ensure that the question of agriculture becomes much more high on the climate change agenda as we develop the road post-Copenhagen. With regard to the clean development mechanism, it's one of the options within the Kyoto Protocol that regulates climate change at the current time, where developed countries can pay developing countries for the emission rights, so they can emit carbon dioxide in developed countries and invest in greenhouse gas cutting projects in developing countries. So that's between the North and the South. There is also a mechanism between countries in the South where they can also target greenhouse gas cutting mechanism in one country against what they do in their own country. So it's a South-South collaboration. Agriculture is not included in this, and we need to get agriculture involved because, as I mentioned, greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural forestry sector is about 1/3 of total emissions. So if we can bring this into these mechanisms for financing, that will also help cut the emissions. When the Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, there was very little, if any, discussion about agriculture and forestry. The focus was on greenhouse gas emissions and partly also from the greenhouse gas emissions coming from deforestation. As we moved up to the Kyoto Protocol, the countries tried to find targets for emission reductions, and there are very small commitments by the industrialized countries for stabilizing the emissions of greenhouse gases. But agriculture was not in that discussion to any extent at all. Since the Kyoto Protocol was signed, there has been a lot of discussion about reduction of greenhouse gases emissions from cutting of tropical forests and degrading of forest lands. And there is something called REDD, which is to reduce the emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, which is now part of the political process leading up to the Copenhagen discussions on a follow-up to the Kyoto Protocol. However, agriculture still doesn't figure very prominently in those discussions. There are initial dialogues with regard to expanding REDD on forest, also with agricultural land, but there is a major opportunity to include carbon for carbon sequestration also in agricultural land. The reason why agriculture was not included to any extent up until Copenhagen, there are many reasons for that. It has been difficult to measure carbon sequestration in agricultural lands. It's easier to look at forests, non-forest cover, and determine how much carbon dioxide will be emitted from the cutting of forests. There are, however, today methodologies to also look at agricultural land. We need much more remote sensing to follow land use and land use change so that can be used for verification purposes.